There's a line in Yeats' poem, The Second Coming. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. And I can't help but feel that way right now. It's honestly been a disaster the past week or so, and I've actually been like demoralized on a personal level. Like it's really starting to hit me. Like I am not going to lie, I am feeling legitimately depressed. Because it feels like almost everyone on the right is supporting, whether aggressively or cautiously, what Trump has been doing lately in Venezuela and his broader threats against Greenland, against Canada, etc. The only major voices I've seen really push back are TRS. And TRS, you know what? I feel bad about any time I've really countersignaled them in the past because honestly, they've been the only ones lately who have consistently pushed back against the Trumpist agenda. My only issue with them is I think they don't build bridges as much as they should. Like they're way too quick to like burn bridges with anybody who like agrees with them 95%, but then it's like, oh, the other 5% just got to burn the bridge. That's my main criticism of them, but I will say in their favor, from what I've seen, they're the only ones, the only prominent voice on the right who has been consistently against this. Like Fuentes has flip-flopped repeatedly, and now he's just straight up raw in support of this. Richard Spencer has supported this. Even Tucker Carlson, I'm a bit disappointed, he's been more cautious than the others. Like from what I've seen of the statements he's made, he's not all raw about it, but he seems like cautiously optimistic. From my perspective, there's nothing good that's going to come out of this because when you look at Trump and what he's done, I mean, he's the most aggressively pro-Zionist president in U.S. history. He's chipping away at the First Amendment on behalf of Israel. And we're expected to believe that all this in Venezuela has nothing to do with the fact that Venezuela is one of the few countries on earth that has been very consistently anti-Israel. Like, come on, give me a break. But it's honestly not just about Israel. It's not just about Zionism and it's not just about Jews. It's about more than that. It's about, on a fundamental level, from what I've been seeing on Twitter lately and in general from MAGA types, they just hate Europe on a very deep level. And I think it goes back all the way to the founding of the United States. Because if you look at some of the statements made at the time, like by the founding fathers and by others at the time, there was this hatred for Europe that has always been part of the American identity. And I think thankfully at the time, they weren't able to diverge from Europe to the same extent simply because of the limitations of technology at the time. So it's like in spite of their ideology, in spite of their belief system, they still created beautiful places, like beautiful cities and towns. But I think as America expanded westward and southward, it just got further and further away from that initial European identity, both physically, like geographically, as well as spiritually. And we can see that like with how their cities have been built, like how they look, like as you go further and further west, they just get more and more sprawled, more and more modernist, at least until you reach the West Coast. And when you reach the West Coast, it actually goes back again, kind of. So there's a bit of, I guess you could say, a bell curve there in the inland areas, like the heartland and the inland west, where it's just you reach peak America. But I guess my point is like it's about a lot of things. It's about just this overall individualistic perspective and this rejection of traditionalism, this rejection of even the concept of rootedness, like this constant frontier mentality where it's like you always have to be moving, you always have to be at the frontier, never setting down roots, never building things, always like never building things to last, never building communities to last. Just always looking forward and never looking at where you are or where you came from. And I think that's a major problem with the Americanist mentality, is that fundamentally, like, frontier locations, like frontiers don't build great things. Like, if you look at every great city, every great work of architecture, every great place, they're all places that were not the frontier at the time. Like, they're places that got more settled. And that's why we never really saw any great cities of that sort in the Western US, because it just was settled way too recently. And then, of course, we have modernism now, which has just ruined everything. But I mean, it's not just about architecture. It's about a lot more than that. It's about the general cultural attitude, like, toward hating community, hating the very concept of community, hyper individualism. And it's not just about race either, because it's like, if it was just about race, then why did we see all this happening in places like Salt Lake City or Phoenix or like Omaha or Des Moines, which didn't really have much of a black population at the time in like the 50s or 60s. And frankly, why we see it happening in Canada also. I mean, I just don't buy the idea that it's just about race. And especially when, like, Americanists today glorify it. They're like, oh, we like that video Nick Fuentes made recently. He literally made a laundry list of like all the things that are, in my opinion, the worst about the US, and he listed them as the best things, like the massive vehicles, massive houses, how far the houses are apart from each other, how you can't walk anywhere, you have to drive, there's no transit. Everything is built around the individual house, the individual car. There's no sense of community, and this idea that this is great, that this is some sort of ideal way to live. And I mean, people say Europe isn't innovative, but they sure as hell have the US and Canada beat in terms of their public transit, for instance. And it's exactly that. It's like the Americanist response is, well, we don't need public transit, we have cars. And it's like, it's this, you can't build a community around the car. It's antithetical. Like, cars are inherently individualistic. They're inherently anti-community. And I think this is just the core problem here. It's cultural. Like, the core problem with the United States is cultural. It's also economic to a degree, but I would say even more so cultural. And it's the main reason why, like, I think a lot of Europeans would be fine with, or Canadians or Australians, New Zealanders, like, people would be fine with America dominating the West if they didn't try to shove their culture in our faces and force us to become like them. Like, if they didn't constantly push us, you have to be individualists like us. You have to drive big cars like us. You have to redesign your cities like us. Like, rebuild everything around the automobile, around like the road, which is basically what Europeans started to do in the 50s and 60s, but then they turned back. And I think that pissed a lot of Americans off. They're like, no, you have to be like us. And I see it today with the things they say on social media. Like, they're constantly talking about how they hate Europe because Europeans are not like Americans. Like, they hate them for their narrow streets, for their walkable cities, for their far better public transit. They hate them for their old buildings, frankly. Like, they hate them for their historic architecture. Like, they hate them because they didn't destroy every single city and rebuild it to make it look like Phoenix or Dallas. And that's why they hate the cities in the US that aren't like that either. Like, they hate cities like Boston or New York or Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia or New Orleans that still have some vestige of that traditional identity, like architecturally and also in layout, in urban planning. They don't like that. They don't like the fact that these places exist in the United States. They'd rather these places didn't exist. That's why they keep gloating about how great it would be if there was a nuclear war and all the Democrat cities were taken out. When they say Democrat cities, they really mean those ones especially, like the walkable historic ones. That's what they really want taken out. Like, they don't necessarily have as much of a problem with the existence of Atlanta, despite it being a very, very Democratic city, not just the city, but even the suburbs. It's a very, very blue city in how it votes, the entire metropolitan area, even the white parts. It's a very blue. It's one of the bluest metropolitan areas in the United States, but they don't mind Atlanta as much because Atlanta's sprawling, Atlanta's car dependent, Atlanta's modernist. So they're more okay with it. It's the cities like Boston that they really take issue with. Like, they just don't like anything where buildings touch each other or even close to each other, especially residential buildings. And especially historic residential buildings. They really hate it. They hate people taking trains. They hate people walking anywhere. They hate people not being fat. And that's one thing I've noticed. They hate me personally. I've noticed that. Like, I notice a certain resentment I get for just not being fat because I'm a skinny guy. So, like, they hate that. They definitely, and there's actually, like, studies showing that, like, it is a thing. Like, conservatives on average are fatter, liberals are skinnier, even in terms of just basic build, like being ectomorphs versus endomorphs. Like, it is a thing. And I'm not saying I'm a liberal. I'm a third positionist. Like, I'm a genuine neither of the above in terms of how I identify. Because, like, I mean, obviously my views on race and gender and sexuality are extremely incompatible with those of the present day liberal left, and I don't pretend otherwise. But at the same time, like, yeah, in a cultural way, I do identify more with the blue states than the red states, and I do identify in many ways more with, if not Europe itself, because I mean, Europe, I love going to Europe, but I will say, like, I am more North American in many ways just because this is where I'm from. But, like, at the end of the day, like, I feel more at home somewhere like Toronto or Boston than I do in, like, Phoenix or Las Vegas or, like, somewhere like that, like Oklahoma City or whatever. I haven't been to Oklahoma City, but I'm saying that's probably how I'd feel there. And I know I'm rambling a lot here, but my point is, like there's this fundamental hatred for everything European. And it's like, okay, if you want to negotiate, we can negotiate. Like, I'm not even, like, I've said in the past, I want to watch it all burn down, like the Atlanticist world order. And it's like, maybe I'm starting to eat those words. Maybe I'm starting to realize, hey, that was being emotional. That was irrational. I don't know. I mean, part of me still feels that way, but another part feels, wait a second. Now that it's actually starting to happen, this might not be such a good thing. This might be actually very bad. It might be very physically destructive. It could result in people dying. It could result in war. It could result in a lot of historic architecture being destroyed, frankly, on a citywide, nationwide, continent-wide scale. Like, I mean, the threat of physical war between the EU and Russia is very real right now. And I mean, I don't see Russia as being entirely responsible or entirely the aggressor here. I think frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if this was kind of like, frankly, the plot of the Star Wars prequels, with US in the shadows pitting Russia and the EU against each other. If this has been the plan all along, like with the Nord Stream pipeline, with Euromaidan, like the protests in Ukraine, with the US being behind all this stuff, it wouldn't shock me one bit. But again, I can't prove that. I have no direct proof of that, only speculation. So I'm not pretending like I know this as a fact. But nonetheless, I think it is a good thing if Europe starts building up its military more. I think they need to. I don't know, like, is the right path divesting from the US completely, or is it making amends? I don't know. But the problem is, like, if Trump thinks the ball is in his court entirely, Europe's just going to get a very shitty deal out of this. So, I mean, they really need to think about, like, what their terms are and really what. And I think, at least in my case, what my biggest objection would be with the United States is the cultural imperialism. It'd be like, we can respect a lot else about you guys, but you guys have to allow us to preserve our own culture. And that's the thing. I think a lot of Americans don't want that. Like they go on trips to Europe and they complain that it's not American enough. And it's like, you know what? This is just ridiculous. And this is one reason a lot of countries do turn to China, because China, for all their problems, they're not culturally imperialist to the extent the US is. Like, they're not trying to, like, sinicize the entire globe. And I think that's the biggest demand I think other countries should be making of the US is like, okay, we're willing to potentially do business with you. And yeah, maybe, who knows, maybe they can't survive on their own. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. I don't know. But if they choose to make amends with the US, they have to, I think the one area where they have to put their foot down is we're not going to tolerate the sheer amount of cultural imperialism there has already been. Like, they need to put restrictions on things like the spread of the English language, on American fast food corporations and Canadian ones too, like Tim Hortons, frankly. These fast food mega chains, unhealthy food in general, frankly. Like, a lot of which does come from the United States. Cars, like US trying to sell these mega SUVs and mega pickup trucks, like trying to aggressively push them on Europe, trying to get Europe to change their emission standards, their laws regarding vehicle sizes or vehicle emissions or what have you. All this stuff they're trying to push. And just the car centrism in general, like all these aspects of Americanism that they just aggressively try to push. Like, I think that, not to mention, obviously, the multiculturalism, the immigration, all that stuff. Now, allegedly, the Trump administration is saying, oh, we're not going to push that anymore. Are they? I don't know. But there's that too. I mean, there is proof, like there's the WikiLeaks document of US pushing diversity and multiculturalism onto Estonia. This is documented in the WikiLeaks. So there is proof that the US has been doing this, plus the denazification campaign in Germany after World War II involved basically brainwashing the Germans into believing that the Jews didn't do nothing and that there was absolutely no reason at all for the Germans to be upset with them. Like, that was literally what they were told after World War II, what they were brainwashed into believing in these the re-education process of the denazification campaign. So it's like, yeah, there's all this stuff, like all these aspects of cultural imperialism, ideological imperialism that the US engages in. And I think that has to be the first step. Like, Europeans have to assert themselves on a cultural level, because it's like, frankly, like, that's, to me, I think the biggest issue. Like, culturally and ideologically. Like, they have to be like, okay, we're doing business with the US is one thing, even letting them have their military bases or whatever, but all this other stuff, this cultural imperialism, it's just gone way too far. And I think a lot of Europeans don't recognize this. They don't see this as a main issue, but I think it's like the biggest issue, frankly, regarding the United States and its presence in Europe and in Canada and everywhere. But I mean, if they want to go the other route and truly assert their independence, that's going to be an uphill battle. But you know what? Good luck to them. If that's the route they want to take, then good on them. And I hope that if they do take that route, that Canada can still have good relations with the EU. Because they need to remember, Trump hates us too. He's been shitting on us also. And I think Canadians would be stupid if we don't reach out to Europe in this case. Like, who knows? Maybe one day we could even be, kind of like Turkey, like bridging the gap, playing both sides, where we could be on good terms with both the US and the EU, or who knows? But I'm just saying, frankly, the rhetoric I see coming out of Trumpist circles disgusts me. Like that one Nick Fuentes video, I think encapsulates all of it perfectly, but it's not just that. I've been seeing it everywhere lately, like on Twitter. I've been seeing this rhetoric come out of people like Vance, Musk, Trump, like calling Europe a museum. Like the implication when they use the word museum against Europe is that it's a bad thing that they have all this historic architecture, and if they want to become part of the modern world, they need to destroy it and replace everything with glass buildings, glass skyscrapers and McMansions and glass condos and all this techie bugman shit. And when they say things like, oh, you use trains, which are an outdated 19th century mode of transportation, it's like, okay, right wingers talk about per capita. Okay, you want to talk about per capita? Per capita car accident death rates. Look that up, okay? Your way of the future, it kills twice as many people per capita as homicides do. And not only that, but frankly, I'm sorry, but fucking climate change is real. It's real. It keeps getting hotter and hotter. It's just harder. I was a skeptic too at one point. But you know what? The weather just keeps getting hotter and hotter and it doesn't stop. And it's like at a certain point, it's like you have to start considering that maybe there's some truth to it. Like overall global temperatures just keep rising and they've accelerated in the last few years. So it's like, and that's another thing when they say, oh, Europe's parasitical. It's like, no, Europe's been doing the heavy lifting in terms of addressing climate change and in terms of making themselves more green. And granted, yeah, there's been recent events that have undermined that somewhat with the war in Ukraine. But at least Europe's actually trying. At least they acknowledge that climate change is real. And okay, if it's true that man-made climate change is real, then you can't just accuse Europe of being parasitical and not doing the heavy lifting, because they've done plenty of heavy lifting in actually upgrading their society to be more green and to be less polluting. And they've done a fucking hell of a lot more heavy lifting in that regard than we have. If you look at our per capita carbon emissions compared to theirs, Canada and the US and Australia compared to Europe, it's we are far worse than they are. For some reason, New Zealand is not quite as bad. I'm not sure why. But maybe it's because less heating and cooling because they have a more moderate climate. But yeah, honestly, I mean, yeah, I don't know. This anti-European rhetoric and anti-Canadian and basically anti-everyone other than the US themselves, and I suppose Israel, because they love Israel. Well, some of them love Israel, but a lot of them do. But even the ones who allegedly don't love Israel are now on board with Trump on everything. So I don't know. I mean, honestly, this is very demoralizing, but maybe some good can come out of it if the Europeans and Canadians, if we rediscover our balls and remilitarize and also, frankly, assert that we do not want to be culturally assimilated by the US. And I think that's honestly, it's the most important thing is the cultural aspect. That and there's a lot of important aspects, but I think the cultural aspect is very important. And it's something that a lot of people overlook in these discussions. But yeah, I guess that's all I got to say about that.